It was Christmas Eve in the small snow-blanketed town of Winter Hollow. The streets were quiet, the houses decked out in twinkling lights, and the smell of pine and gingerbread lingered in the crisp air. For 17-year-old Ellie, Christmas had always been her favorite holiday. She was excited to spend the evening with her family, but something about this year felt off. Her parents had left earlier in the day to pick up her grandmother from a nearby town, leaving Ellie to babysit her 8-year-old brother, Sam. They promised to return before midnight. As the snowstorm outside intensified, the roads became treacherous, and the prospect of their parents returning on time began to dwindle. Ellie and Sam tried to keep the festive spirit alive by watching Christmas movies and drinking hot chocolate. Around 8 p.m., the power flickered and went out, plunging the house into darkness. Ellie lit a few candles and reassured Sam it was just the storm. But deep down, she felt uneasy. The house, now silent except for the howling wind outside, felt unnervingly still. Ellie decided to check her phone for updates from her parents, but there was no signal. As she moved to the window to look out, she noticed something odd, fresh footprints in the snow leading up to their porch. Ellie froze. The prints weren't theirs. She and Sam hadn't been outside all day. They were large, like those of a man, and they stopped at the front door but didn't lead away. She tried to dismiss it, reasoning it could be from a delivery person, but no package was left behind. Just as she turned away, there was a loud knock at the door. It wasn't festive or polite. It was heavy and deliberate. Sam clutched her arm, his eyes wide with fear. "Who is it?" Ellie called out, her voice trembling. No answer. "Maybe it's Mom and Dad," Sam whispered. But Ellie shook her head. Her parents had a spare key and wouldn't knock like that. The knock came again, harder this time. Ellie grabbed a fireplace poker, her heart pounding. Summoning her courage, she approached the door but didn't open it. Instead, she peeked through the peephole. No one was there. Ellie backed away from the door, her breathing shallow. Just then, Sam gasped and pointed toward the living room window. A figure stood there, staring in. It was a man in a tattered Santa suit, his face obscured by a thick white beard and hat. His gloved hand tapped the glass rhythmically. Ellie's stomach churned. "Go to your room and lock the door," she whispered to Sam. He obeyed without hesitation. The man didn't move, but continued to tap on the window. Ellie shouted, "Leave us alone! I'm calling the police!" But she knew she couldn't. The storm had cut off their phone lines. As if in response, the man slowly raised a finger to his lips, signaling her to be quiet. Then he walked out of sight, disappearing into the shadows of the storm. Ellie quickly locked all the doors and windows, her hands trembling. She double-checked the back door, but as she turned the lock, she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, a jingling, like sleigh bells, coming from inside the house. She spun around, gripping the fireplace poker tightly. The sound grew louder, echoing through the hallways. It was coming from upstairs, where Sam was. Ellie raced up the stairs, her heart pounding. "Sam!" she called, but there was no response. She reached his room and found the door still locked. "Sam, open up." "It's me." There was a pause, and then the door creaked open. Sam stood there, his face pale. "He's inside," he whispered, pointing toward the closet. Ellie's grip on the poker tightened as she approached the closet. She could feel her pulse in her ears, each step heavier than the last. The jingling sound had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. She threw open the closet door, but it was empty except for Sam's clothes and toys. Ellie exhaled shakily and turned to reassure Sam when she saw him staring past her. "He's behind you," Sam whimpered. Ellie spun around, swinging the poker wildly, but the hallway was empty. She grabbed Sam's hand and dragged him toward her room, slamming the door shut and barricading it with a dresser. They sat huddled together in the corner, listening to the creaks and groans of the old house. Hours passed and the storm began to subside. Just when Ellie thought they might be safe, she heard footsteps in the hallway. "Ellie, it's Mom and Dad," a familiar voice called. Relief flooded through her, but something felt off. Why would her parents have arrived so quietly? And how had they gotten inside? "Prove it," Ellie shouted. There was a pause. "Sweetheart, it's us. Open the door." Ellie's hands shook. Something about their tone was wrong, flat and emotionless. She didn't move. The doorknob jiggled. Then the voice spoke again, this time distorted and mocking. "Ellie, let us in." Ellie clutched Sam tightly as the door began to rattle violently. Suddenly, the noise stopped. The silence was deafening. Minutes felt like hours until they heard sirens in the distance. A bright light shone through the window. It was the police. Ellie opened the window and screamed for help. The officers broke down the front door and searched the house, but found no one. The footprints outside were gone, erased by the fresh snow. Ellie and Sam were taken to safety, but as they recounted their story, one officer pulled Ellie aside. "There's something you should know," he said gravely. 10 years ago, a man dressed as Santa broke into a family's home on this street. He killed them all, except for one boy. That boy disappeared and was never found. Ellie's blood ran cold as she realized the horrifying possibility. That boy, now a man, might have come back to finish what he started. As the police drove them away, Ellie glanced back at the house. In the upstairs window, a figure in a tattered Santa suit watched them leave, his gloved hand raised in a silent wave. He killed them all, except for one boy. That boy disappeared and was never found. Ellie's blood ran cold as she realized the horrifying possibility. That boy, now a man, might have come back to finish what he started. As the police drove them away, Ellie glanced back at the house. In the upstairs window, a figure in a tattered Santa suit watched them leave, his gloved hand raised in a silent wave. It was a snowy Christmas Eve in the quiet town of Evergreen Hills. A fresh layer of snow blanketed the streets, and families were cozy inside, celebrating the holiday. For the Harpers, this Christmas was bittersweet. It was their first one without Grandpa George, who had passed away earlier that year. To honor his memory, they decided to decorate the house just as he used to, with hundreds of bright, multicolored lights draped across every corner of the home. Emma Harper, the eldest daughter, was tasked with turning on the lights. She was 18, level-headed, and proud of her ability to keep her younger siblings in line. Her parents had gone to a late Christmas church service, leaving Emma to babysit her twin brothers, Liam and Noah, who were 9 years old. Around 8 p.m., Emma plugged in the Christmas lights and the house glowed with a warm, festive radiance. The twins cheered as the lights twinkled and danced. Everything seemed perfect, until Emma noticed something strange. The lights outside the house were flickering erratically, but the ones inside remained steady. She stepped onto the porch to inspect the issue. The cold bit at her cheeks as she stood under the canopy of lights, trying to spot a loose bulb. That's when she saw it. Across the street, a man stood motionless under a street lamp. He was tall, wearing a long black coat and a red scarf. His face was obscured by the shadow of his hat, but Emma could feel his gaze locked on her. "Can I help you?" she called out, trying to sound confident. The man didn't respond. Instead, he took a slow step forward, his boots crunching in the snow. Then another, and another. Emma quickly retreated inside, slamming and locking the door behind her. She peeked through the curtains, but the man was gone. Emma tried to shake off the encounter and focus on the twins. They were playing with their new toys in the living room, blissfully unaware of what had happened. To distract herself, she called her parents, but the line went straight to voicemail. Moments later, her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, she answered. At first, there was only static. Then a deep, raspy voice whispered, "You shouldn't have turned on the lights." Emma's stomach dropped. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice trembling. The line went dead. Before she could process what had happened, the Christmas lights inside the house began flickering violently. The twins screamed as the room plunged into darkness. Emma grabbed a flashlight and reassured the boys. "It's just a power surge. Stay close to me." She led them to the kitchen, where the emergency candles were stored. As she lit a candle, a faint tapping sound echoed from the living room window. Tap, tap, tap. "Stay here," she whispered to the twins, her heart pounding. She crept towards the window, gripping the flashlight tightly. The tapping grew louder. When she reached the window, she saw him again, the man in the black coat. This time he was standing just outside, his hand pressed against the glass. Emma screamed and stumbled backward. The man's face was now partially visible, a pale, hollow visage with deep-set eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Suddenly, the front door rattled violently. The twins screamed from the kitchen. Emma bolted back to them, her mind racing. "We're going upstairs," she ordered, grabbing their hands and dragging them toward the staircase. Upstairs, Emma barricaded them in her bedroom. She locked the door and pushed a dresser in front of it. The twins huddled on the bed, trembling. The house had gone eerily silent, but Emma knew he was still out there. She peeked out the bedroom window and saw the Christmas lights outside blinking in a strange pattern, on and off, like Morse code. "What do you want?" she whispered, her breath fogging up the glass. To her horror, the man appeared again, now standing in the middle of their front yard. This time he held something in his hands, a string of Christmas lights. Slowly, methodically, he began wrapping them around his neck, tightening them like a noose. Emma turned away, her stomach churning. When she looked back, he was gone. Emma's phone buzzed again, another unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Why are you hiding?" the voice whispered. Her blood ran cold. "Leave us alone," she shouted, but the voice just laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made her skin crawl. Suddenly, the bedroom door handle jiggled, then came a loud bang. The twins screamed as the door shook violently. Emma grabbed a heavy lamp and prepared to defend her brothers. "Stay back," she yelled. The banging stopped. A chilling silence followed. Then a familiar voice called out, "Emma, it's Dad. Open the door." She froze. "Prove it," she demanded. There was a pause, then, "Emma, stop messing around. It's us. Open the door." Something wasn't right. She edged closer to the door and peeked through the keyhole. Her parents stood there, but their faces were wrong. Their eyes were too wide, their smiles too stiff, and behind them, The man in the black coat loomed, his hollow eyes staring directly at her. Emma screamed and backed away from the door. Suddenly, the Christmas lights outside exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the house into total darkness. The twins cried as Emma frantically searched for her phone to call for help. But it was dead. A strange humming noise filled the air, growing louder and louder until it was deafening. And then, silence. When Emma woke up, it was morning. The house was eerily calm, the Christmas lights were off. The barricade was gone, and the front door was wide open. Her parents returned shortly after, panicked to find the door ajar. Emma tried to explain what had happened, but they dismissed it as a bad dream. But Emma knew it wasn't a dream. The Christmas lights remained dark for the rest of the season, and every night she felt eyes watching her from the darkness outside. And every so often, she would hear it again, the faint tapping on the window. In the dense woods of Aspen Ridge, where snow lay thick and the trees stood like silent sentinels, there was an old family cabin owned by the Merricks. They hadn't used it in years, but this Christmas, Emma Merrick, a 24-year-old college student, decided to revive an old tradition. With her parents away on a cruise, she and her two best friends, Sophie and Matt, made plans to spend Christmas Eve at the secluded cabin. They loaded up a car with blankets, food, and gifts, and by mid-afternoon, they were driving through the snowy forest. The road became narrower and rougher as they neared the cabin. The isolation was palpable, but Emma felt nostalgic. She hadn't been here since she was 10, when the family abruptly stopped visiting. Her parents never said why. The cabin was exactly as she remembered it, rustic, cozy, and nestled in the heart of the woods. They lit a fire, set up a small Christmas tree, and started cooking dinner. The atmosphere was warm and festive, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, a creeping unease settled over them. After dinner, Matt suggested they build a snowman in the moonlit yard. They bundled up and trudged outside, the cold biting at their faces. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sounds their laughter and the crunch of snow underfoot. As they finished the snowman, Sophie frowned. "Did you hear that?" Emma stopped, her breath visible in the icy air. "Hear what?" "It sounded like humming," Sophie whispered, her eyes scanning the tree line. Matt laughed nervously. "It's probably the wind. Come on, let's head back inside." But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. She glanced toward the edge of the woods and thought she saw movement, a shadow darting between the trees. She didn't mention it, not wanting to scare the others. Back inside, they warmed up by the fire. Matt joked about their creepy snowman as Sophie pulled out a deck of cards for a game. But the mood shifted when they noticed something strange. The snowman they'd built earlier was now visible through the window, and it had moved. At first, they thought it was a trick of the light. The snowman appeared closer to the cabin than before. Matt dismissed it, saying the snow had shifted. But as they stared, the snowman seemed wrong. Its head was tilted unnaturally to one side, and its twig arms were raised as if reaching toward the house. "What the hell?" Sophie whispered. Suddenly, a loud knock echoed through the cabin. They all jumped. Emma cautiously approached the door. "Who's there?" she called, but there was no answer. She peeked out through the peephole but saw only darkness. Another knock, this time harder. She turned to Matt. "Check the back door." Matt grabbed a flashlight and headed to the back of the cabin. He opened the door a crack and shone the beam outside. Nothing. When he returned, his face was pale. "The snowman. It's gone." The three of them stood frozen, staring at each other. Sophie locked the doors and windows while Emma grabbed her phone to call for help. But there was no signal. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Sophie said, her voice shaking. As they debated what to do, they heard it, slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. Then came a soft, chilling sound, humming. Emma's stomach dropped. "That's what I saw earlier," she whispered. The humming grew louder, circling the cabin. Matt grabbed a poker from the fireplace, but his hands were shaking. "We need to leave, now." They gathered their coats and boots, planning to make a run for the car, but as they opened the front door, they froze. The snowman was back, standing at the bottom of the porch steps, its head now completely upside down. Beside it, the snow was disturbed, footprints leading to and from the cabin. Panicked, they slammed the door shut and barricaded it with furniture. The humming stopped, replaced by a faint scratching sound on the cabin walls. "What the hell is going on?" Sophie cried. Emma's mind raced. Her parents had always avoided talking about the cabin, but now she wondered if there was a reason. She rummaged through an old chest by the fireplace, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the strange occurrences. At the bottom of the chest, she found a faded journal. It belonged to her grandfather. Flipping through its brittle pages, she discovered an entry from decades ago. December 24th, 1985. "The woods are restless. We should never have come back. The figure in the snow watches us, follows us. It isn't human." Emma's hands trembled as she read the final lines. "Do not acknowledge it. Do not let it in." Before Emma could explain, the scratching stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. Then the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Matt lit a lantern, its flickering light casting eerie shadows. "We can't stay here," he said. But as they prepared to leave, a loud crash came from the back door. It had been forced open, snow blew into the cabin, and in the doorway stood a figure. It wasn't the snowman. It was tall, gaunt, and cloaked in tattered black. Its face was obscured by a hood, but the humming was unmistakable. The thing stepped inside, leaving wet, slushy footprints in its wake. "Stay back," Matt shouted, swinging the poker. But the figure didn't flinch. It raised a hand, long fingers curling toward them. Emma grabbed the journal and shouted, "Get out! You're not welcome here!" The figure stopped, tilting its head as if considering her words. Then it turned and walked back into the night, disappearing into the snow. The three of them didn't waste a second. They bolted to the car and sped away, not looking back. As they reached the main road, Emma glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin was barely visible in the distance, but she could still make out the snowman. It was standing on the porch now, facing the road. Days later, Emma confronted her parents. They hesitated but eventually admitted the truth. Decades ago, the family had encountered something strange at the cabin. After her grandfather's death, they vowed never to return. "You were never supposed to go back," her mother said, tears in her eyes. Emma moved on with her life, but she could never shake the feeling that something from that night followed her. And every Christmas Eve, no matter where she was, she would hear it again, the faint sound of humming in the snow.